Hi everyone! In this demo, I am going to show you how to make some handles. So let's get started. So you just want to wedge up some of your plastic clay right out of your bag, and then I just tossed it to make it a bit longer. And then I'm just going to take it and start to squeeze it in between my fingers and my thumbs while I move my hands up and down. And then I like to flip and do the same thing. So once you get it pretty even and it's a bit longer, then you can move to your table and you're just going to start to roll the coil out. I'm rolling from wrist through fingertips. I'm kind of creating this shape with my hands. And I usually start my roll from the center out, but if you get a thick spot, you can start right to the outside of that thick spot and roll outward to try to even your coil out. And I'm looking for about 1 inch thick coil. Sometimes I'll do a little bit of a thinner coil as well. It all depends on the size mug that you have. If you are adjusting your coil, you'll notice I set it down gently. You don't want to set it down hard against the surface. This is very soft clay, and then you'll get a flat spot, and it's going to be harder for you to roll your coil. I'm going to just cut the ends off where the coil starts to curl in a little bit. So I'm going to cut my coil into smaller pieces. Since I'm working on a metal table and the clay is pretty wet, I am going to work on a canvas covered board. And so I just start by taking one of my sections of coil and I'm going to start to hit it with the flat spot of the heel of my hand closest to my wrist, and I'm going to kind of hit it towards me, so that's going to stretch it out and also flatten it out. Okay, so now I'm going to cut this a bit more so it tapers at the bottom. So right now we have pretty much a rectangle, but I do want a slight taper. So I'm just taking my fettling knife and cutting it so it has a taper towards the bottom. So now we have our slightly tapered form here. So I'm going to just put a little water on my index fingers and apply pressure from the top down to the tapered end. The back side still has this sharp edge, so I'm going to flip and apply a little bit less pressure, but I am just going to slightly round the opposite side as well. Now this is still thicker than I would want it for a handle. Slap and drag, and that's going to kind of just pull that clay and stretch it out a bit. Another thing I like to do is you can either take your sponge, wring it out pretty well, and then start to pull some water over this, because it's just going to give that clay some more flexibility to stretch it out further. Or you could pull it a little bit. So I'm just getting my right hand wet, and I'm using the back side of my index finger and then my thumb and just making an oval shape. And I'm applying pressure from the top down. Now I'm going to apply a little bit more pressure just to the bottom half so I don't lose that taper. And then you can also make sure you don't have those sharp edges by running your thumb or index finger down the handle. If you want to keep that really flat back on it, just take your thumb and run it down that flat area, and you can see my index finger is resting to the back to support that motion. I'm going to do one more pass because I'm getting about the thickness that I want. If you want this narrower down here, you just want to keep pulling that bottom area, and you're going to see that's going to just start to keep getting narrower and thinner. Now this handle is done, so I want to make sure that I let it set up in this arch shape. So then that way, once it dries a little bit to leather hard or a soft leather hard, then I can attach it. I will cut off this extra and cut off anything I don't need and attach it to my mugs. I'll show that to you in a future video. You can also do it just by dropping the clay on a flat surface. If you wanted a longer handle, then don't cut your coil into as small of sections. Once again, I'm going to cut in a taper so I have more of a carrot shape. Then I'm going to soften these outside edges. I'm going to pre-stretch this a little bit, so just slapping it down on the canvas, it'll get stuck, and then I just pull a little bit to stretch it out. Now this one I want to have a slight curve on the inside, like this handle here has this slight curve that goes in. You can see it on this handle as well. So for this one, we're gonna do one extra step. I'm gonna take my thumb and just push it down into the middle. I'm gonna make a few passes. You can widen it at the top if you want. You can use your index finger as well if you feel like you have more control using your index finger. And then you could do the same thing we did on the last one to stretch it out, where you start to just use your sponge, and then you could do this kind of stretching maneuver again. Flip it to the back. Be more gentle on the back or you're gonna misshapen what you did on the front. But if you flip it and you're just real gentle, it'll be okay. So you don't have to go and pull your handles like I'm doing if you're not feeling comfortable doing that because you're afraid you're gonna tear your handle. You can do your stretching by using your sponge or continue to stretch by doing this technique. So you can see it's thinning this out. When you go to bend this handle, you're gonna have that nice inner curve. And this is a very wide handle, so if you don't want it this wide, then just pre-cut before you do your shaping. So when it comes to making handles, I highly recommend that you make at least 2 handles for each mug that you've made. Because for one, you don't know if while you're holding it up to your cup form to see if you got the right shape that you want, what if you accidentally drop it? Pop! And then you don't have another handle that's at the right moisture level for you to attach to your cup form. So it's always good to have a backup, and it's also good to have more options. So usually when I make handles, I'll just do a whole wear board of handles, and then I get all my cup shapes out, and I'll play with which size and shape, width that I want for my mugs. So just make more so you have options. I'll do one more of the handle that has that inside curve, and we'll just make this one a little bit longer. This handle we know we want to be a little bit narrower, so I'm just initially cutting it less wide than I cut the last one. Once again, you can use your thumb or your index finger to apply that inside curve. I make it a little bit wider at the top so it fits the shape. And then you can take your well wrung out sponge and keep thinning it out, or you can slap the clay down and have it catch, and then you just slightly tug on the opposite side to stretch it out. Or you could come over to your bucket of water and go back to your index finger on the back and your thumb to the front. I get my fingers wet and I just pull down. Now I'm taking this part of my hand and letting it rest to this side while my index finger kind of hugs the opposite side, just to kind of stretch it a bit more. That is going to collapse in your shape, but don't worry, because you can come back in with your thumb. So your thumb right down the middle and your index finger to the outside, and just reinsert that. Here we go again. Let's do another style. I'm going to cut in my taper. My index fingers wet, and then soften that edge and create kind of an outside bevel. Now for this one, let's say we wanted to do a handle like this, or if you want it less aggressive, these are the same, made similarly, but you can see one has got kind of a very high point in the middle, and this one is a little lower. Here's another version of it, just slightly wider. Very subtle high point in the middle of this one as well, where it kind of recedes down to the outside, and then you just got that one kind of spine right there more subtly. To do that, you're going to take your index fingers, and I'm going to kind of hold the clay in place with my middle finger, and I just start to slide both of those fingers from the top to the bottom. And you're going to start to see that high point show itself in the middle. And you'll see my middle finger rise along this flat edge while my index finger rides on that corner, pushing that corner down while my middle finger is resting and riding along the tabletop or your canvas board to hold that in. And you can just soften any other areas. Then we're gonna pick it up, and I'm gonna smack that down. It's gonna get stuck, and I'm gonna tug a little at the top. Same thing. Flip it so you can get that shape all the way to the top. Most of the time you're going to be cutting this top part off anyways to get the shape that you need for it to attach to your cup nicely. So I don't always worry about doing much to this very top ½ inch because I know I'm going to be removing most of that anyhow, but you certainly can flip and just extend that up. So now I don't want the handle this thick, and you can see that we have this sharp edge here on the opposite side. So we can either come in with our fingers and smooth that down, or our sponge to keep stretching this and smooth it out more, or we can go over and pull it a little bit. Using the sponge is going to bring out the grog more if you're using a clay with a high grog content, so just know that. The pulling is less likely to bring that out. Soften these sides a little bit. So I'm supporting, all my fingers are pretty much holding on the back, but it's really this inside part of my index finger, and then I'm just softening these outside edges to give them a little bit more of a roundness and a softness. You can also do this after it gets leather hard and you put it on your cup form. You can come in and refine these a bit. So you can see the back side is now a bit more round and this is a bit softer. Okay, so if you want just a very round handle, your coil is already round, but we have to do something to it because you can see when we start to bend it, you're going to get some of that cracking because we haven't really compressed this clay that well and it needs a little moisture so it can have a little more flexibility. So when you put your thumb and your index finger together, it's going to create a nice round shape. You can really just pull that index finger to the side or to the back, and you're going to just get a pretty nice round shape. So I'm just applying pressure from the top all the way through the bottom, and I'm just keeping that roundness. You will notice I switch where this part of my hand is touching the handle because that's going to be a little bit flat, and because you got this flab of skin, it will give you a misshapen spot. So I want to even that out, so I'll either rotate the actual handle in my fingers or I'll rotate where I'm positioning my hand. If it gets longer than you want or you get a bit of a thicker spot, you can just squeeze that off. But this is just going to give you a quite round handle. Roll a coil and thin it out to the thickness that you want it to be. If you get a flat spot, you can take your thumb and just try to knock it down so it rolls a bit nicer for you. And because it's such a small coil, I'm really just needing to use one hand and not two to roll. And I'm just rolling the clay from my wrist through my fingertips. Once again, if I get a flat spot, just taking my index finger and rounding it out a bit. And going back to rolling till I get the length and or thickness that I desire. When you're doing this with your index finger and kind of knocking down some of those sharp edges, that's also going to compress this clay and it's going to want to bend a little bit nicer for you as well. Make sure your surface, your table surface is clean, because I have some little indentations where some of this dry clay is on the table. Now that the coil is getting a little longer, I am using both hands versus just one. Sometimes I'll flip back and forth wherever I see the need. And then if you wanted, you could take your sponge and you're just gonna pull a little moisture over this whole coil. And I'm doing it all the way around it so I can maintain that round shape and not flatten it out. You can cut this off right now if you want, or you could just wait, because I like to let my handles stiffen up to be about leather hard before I attach them to my mugs anyways, so I'll cut most of that off. But you can just shape it into your arch shape there and let it start to stiffen up. So up to this point, I've shown a lot of handles that where they attach to the top of your cup, it's a bit wider, and then it becomes a little bit narrower where it attaches to the bottom. Well, you can also have it be wider and a little narrower in the middle if you'd like instead. I'm going to cut like a crescent shape out from the very middle. So you can see that we kind of made a waist. So it's wider, and a bit narrower. Flipping it is pushing in and kind of giving it some more volume and roundness. And now I don't want the clay to be this thick, so we got to go back to some of our early techniques. If you don't want it to have this much of a narrow inside, just don't cut as much clay out as I did. So you can make that transition a little less aggressive from the top through the middle to the bottom. I'm gonna flip it and address the opposite side so I can make sure it stays round and not sharp, so it's more comfortable to use. And you could keep going to thin it out if you'd like. It's still a bit thick. So if you made a larger cup form like a beer stein, this may be an appropriate size and thickness for you. But if you did something that's a bit smaller, I would keep thinning this out a little bit. I'm avoiding the middle because that is already a thinner piece of clay, and I don't want it to get weak in the middle, so I'm hitting it towards the outside more.